Lord be with you. Let us pray. Almighty God, whose loving hand has given us all that we possess, grant us grace that we may honor you with our substance, and remembering the account which we must one day give, may be faithful stewards of your bounty through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Good morning. It's good to see all of you. I want to recognize somebody. Hold on a minute, I think he's disappeared into the kitchen. Where's Roland? Some of you may have gotten to know Roland, who is one of the officers who has been with us for the last number of months, and I just wanted to share with you some really good news in his professional life, which I think is exciting, and it's very exciting for him. He is about to become a member of the United States Secret Service, and has passed all of the hoops, gone through all the hoops and hurdles, and I think that as I've gotten to know Roland, I knew him before he came to work here, as I've gotten to know him, we need more fine young men who are willing to give of themselves to our country in this way. So God bless you, and wish you all the best. He thinks he may be able to come back here to St. Louis at some point. So
my first field office should be in St. Louis. So I'll be here for another 4 years. So I'll be here on Sundays, hopefully. Come to say hi.
Well,
Just in a suit.
We'll be seeing a little bit more of him before he goes off for his training and education. But we wish you all the best, Roland. Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you.
So again, it's good to see all of you this morning. I usually don't start with disclaimers, but I am today. We're going to talk about money. So if that's going to give you indigestion after your breakfast, or if you're not comfortable talking about money, you can try to leave right now, but I don't know that I'll let you, okay? No, in all seriousness, I do want us to talk just a little bit about money. Sometimes we have been and are reticent in the church to even though we talk about stewardship, we talk about annual giving, we talk about an endowment, we present a budget at our annual meeting. Sometimes we're a little reticent to talk about money and to talk about how it is that money is important, to hold up and to recognize that money is one of the things that Jesus talked a lot about. In fact, he talked more about money than he did about many things. And so I think it's healthy, I think it's good for us to continue to talk about how it is that we can be, should be, and are asked by God to be stewards of our financial resources. And I want to say to you that this conversation today the conversation that I hope we'll have is not going to have much at all to do with a budget. You're going to hear in just a moment from the co-chairs of our annual giving campaign, because that's the time of season that we're in, that season of the church right now for us. But then I just want us to talk a little bit about the spirituality of giving, the spirituality of money. And again, I hope that you'll engage in the conversation. But to begin with, I want to introduce to you a couple that some of you may know, Ann and Andy Spann, who, as I just mentioned, are the co-chairs of this year's annual giving campaign. And they want to say a little bit to you about the campaign and about where we are.
Thank you, David. Good morning, everybody. I'm Andy Spann, and it's my wife, Ann. It's our honor. Thank you. Have a few notes, so we want to be able to follow along a little bit. Is there anything you want to say to start?
I was just going to say we're saying some words about, first of all, we're very honored that David asked us to chair this year's Shining Our Light campaign. We've never done this before, but we're happy to be on board, and we know that it's an important task. And in the 8 o'clock and the 10:30, we're saying some words about the importance of it, where we stand with the campaign. But we are glad that you all are receptive, and we're already halfway to our goal, so thank you.
Right, so we're not going to some of you may have heard our comments at the service, and some of you may be at the 10:30 service, so we're not going to go through that particular prepared remarks or those remarks. We just kind of want to give you an update and then open it up for David's further comments or any questions that you might have. One thing I do want to repeat is the origin of the name of the campaign, which is the Shining Our Light campaign. So what does it mean to shine our light? Well, there are a number of ways in which Janet and David have found to reflect on the concept of light and how it comes from us and what it means in our community and how it relates, I guess, to this campaign. One quote from David's original letter in the campaign brochure was from Steve Garnis Holmes. I don't have my glasses on, so I can't exactly read it, but he writes, "Light is the energy of God. You don't need to produce it or generate it. It is who you are." So, and in John 8:12, Jesus spoke to them saying, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of light." So what we are doing in giving is a form of worship, and that's what we feel strongly about. And that for us, one of the ways that we can worship most powerfully is by giving. So we feel called to do that wherever we can in any little way that we can. So this is a campaign that is near and dear to our hearts. A few comments about the campaign and where it is and what the status is of the campaign. First of all, Janet Rouse does a wonderful job of stewardship management for us. It's amazing how her spirit energizes the whole process and how meaningful it is to her. 79% of the budget for St. Peter's comes from the annual giving program. Other sources are endowments and transfers and one-time gifts and other forms, but by far the largest part of the annual budget is fulfilled by the annual giving campaign. And our goal for this year is $1,150,000. So that's an increase of about 5% over our prior year's goal. Well, why is it increasing? Because the cost of living increases and the cost to provide the resources and the services that are provided through St. Peter's are going up. So one thing that we would ask is that if you have donated in the past, and statistically about 57% of St. Peter's parishioners or St. Peter's families have participated in the campaign. If you have done that in the past, then we ask that you increase your donation by at least 5%. And some people, when they're contacted, their immediate response is just put me down for whatever it was last year. And so we're specifically saying, well, if you do that, then you're actually giving less than you did last year, because the cost of living went up by 5%, and these are real numbers. So please consider an actual increase in that. The other thing that I want to mention about numbers is that, as I said before, almost 50% of the people on our list. We have a list of 470 families that we send letters and brochures to, And that list may be a little bit longer than it is in reality in terms of the St. Peter's parishioners. Some people may not be on the list still, but that's just a few. It's a pretty clean list. And of that, almost 50% don't give anything so in the annual campaign. So we're reaching out to those people. Maybe not anybody in this room, but we're certainly reaching out to everybody on that list and saying, you know, if there's anything you can do to increase or to take that first step and make a donation, that would be wonderful and much appreciated. So where we are as far as the campaign is, as of this morning, of that 470 that was sent out, and let's say 240 or 50 that traditionally gives, 88 have responded to this point, or less than 20% of our parish families have responded with pledges. That is $580,000, which has been pledged to this point, which is about half of our goal. 4 new pledges, that's exciting, and 30 increased pledges. That's great too. And 54 of the pledges of the 88 were the same or decreased. So Dedication Sunday is 1 week away, and we've got a lot of ground to cover between now and then. So there'll be a lot of calls made, and outreach in various forms will occur over the course of the next 7 days. And then there's a special service to pray over the pledges that have been received. And maybe David might talk more about that. I'm not sure. But there's a number of ways to give by mail. Just send your pledge card in. You received a pledge card with a brochure that looks like this. Pledge card looks like a pledge card. You can go online and you can shoot your camera at this barcode, scan code here, and do it that way. That's how I did it. That's how we did it. And there are also other ways to donate than cash or money, stock, for example. At church, you can bring your pledge card in, pray about it, and think about it over the course of the next week or so, and then bring it in next Sunday. And or there's a mobile option too. Download the Realm Connect app and log on and go about it that way. So, David, are you? We're making it really easy. Yeah, that's right. Anything else you want to say?
No, just thank you all for listening to us and for considering what we have to say.
Thank you.
Ann and Andy, thank you very much. So I want to, I'm going to skip a slide or two to focus our thoughts just for a moment on a couple of verses that come from the 5th chapter of Matthew. And these are taken from what's known as the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus sat down and talked about a number of things. And one of the things that he said was, "You are the light of the world." And then he compared that to a city built on a hill as something that cannot be hid. You don't light a lamp and then put it under something. You don't light something and then intentionally try to hide it, but you put it on a lampstand so that it lights up your house. In the same way, then, Jesus said, "Let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. So each year we try to come up with some sort of a theme or a way of helping us to focus on annual giving that's obviously a way of attracting us and helping us to think and be more intentional about why it is that we're giving. So this year, Janet Rouse came into my office one morning and said, "What do you think about this?" And I said, "I think that sounds really good." Well, over about the next week or so, every time she or I, and then I think several other members of our staff turned around, read something, saw something, this kept popping up. Something about letting your light shine, being the light of the world, et cetera, et cetera. So even for somebody like me who, I've often said, if I was Moses and the bush was burning, I wouldn't have noticed the bush burning. But even for somebody like me, I finally was like, I think maybe this is what we need to be thinking about this year. So in addition to us just having some conversation about the spirituality of fundraising, the spirituality of money, I hope that we can think for a few moments today about what it means for us to be those who are reflective of the light of Christ. What does it mean to help others to see the light in not only in this time, but in all times before and unfortunately that will be to come? We all know there will be darkness, right? There will be those times of darkness in which the world, our communities, our homes, our churches, our places of work need light, need hope, need to be able to experience something other than darkness. And I think that often that kind of gets thrown around in the church, talk about, well, we're the light of the world. Let's reflect the light of Christ. Are you familiar with the large candle that's over by the baptismal font? Yes? No? Never seen it? Never heard of it? Okay. So it's called the Paschal Candle, and it is it's lit during the Easter season. And it remains lit until the day of Pentecost, and then it's always lit at funerals, and there are a few other times. But there's a service in our Book of Common Prayer that's not one that it may have been done here in the past, but it's not one that we've done recently. That's called the Easter Vigil, and it's the first service of Easter. And in that service, the Paschal Candle is lit for the first time. And then it's usually brought into a church that's dark, in the darkness. And at three different points along the way, the procession stops as that Paschal Candle literally pierces the darkness of the church. And the words are chanted, "The light of Christ, the light of Christ, thanks be to God." And then each way along the way, that it gets a little bit higher and higher. But the focus then becomes on how it is that you were entering the darkness of the church, entering the darkness of the tomb of Jesus after where he was placed after his crucifixion and burial, and then how the resurrection of Christ, Jesus coming out of that tomb, then is representative of what John's gospel refers to at the very beginning of the story of Jesus, when it talks about how the darkness will not be able to overcome the light, and referencing how Jesus is the one who brought light into the world, who brings light into the darkness. So I just want to commend to you that this is a little more of a serious thing, and it's also an opportunity. It's also an opportunity for us, at times, especially right now when there's a lot going on, isn't there? There's a lot going on in our country. There's a lot going on in the world. There's a lot of angst and confusion some people. Some people are feeling confused. Some people are feeling this and that. And there's always been those times before. And as I said, there always will be. There's an opportunity to reflect something that is, quite frankly, more important than all of that, and that is the light of Christ. To represent that and to be those representatives of that in the world. Nathan Hayden has in his sermon today, if you were at the 8 o'clock service, you've heard this, but if you'll hear it at the 10:30 service, talks about how it is that others can see Christ through us, can see Christ in us, see the Jesus in us. So let me back up then again to talk just a little bit about something that if any of you remember this, then you get a lot of points, because I have used this before. I'll continue to use it because I think it's important. It's been formational for me. It's been very important in my thinking about fundraising, about money, and it comes from a little book written by Father Henry Nouwen, who was known to be one of the most prolific writers of the spiritual life in the last century, in the 20th century. Nouwen was a Roman Catholic priest who worked at at Yale, Harvard, several very distinguished academic institutions, and then ended up his career working in a community with mentally disabled adults. But he was a prolific writer. And I had read many of his books, and he'd always been a very important person for me in my own spiritual formation. And then I was actually involved in fundraising at one point, and was on an airplane, and someone had given me this book, and it's just a very small book, and I read it during the flight, and had no idea that he'd written anything about fundraising. But he'd written this book titled A Spirituality of Fundraising. And so just a few of the things that Nouwen talks about, again, in this book have been things that have been helpful for me. And I just want to continue to hold them up for us as we think about money, as we think about annual budgets, as we think about stewardship, and as we think about what it means to be people who, in a minute, as you're going to see, all of us have some sort of a money story. So Nouwen talks about how money, fundraising, annual giving is something he describes as being something that's very rich and beautiful. It's something that should be, he says, joyful, confident, and hope-filled. And then he goes on to say that fundraising is first and foremost a form of ministry. It's not just a matter of saying, we need money, we want your money. It's a matter of ministry. And as he says, from the perspective of the gospel, fundraising should never be in response to a crisis. In fundraising circles, have any of you been involved in formal fundraising? So if you have, you know that there's something called crisis fundraising. And that usually means that it ain't good, right? The lights are about to be turned off. Salaries are about to not be paid. I was reading this morning in the dispatch about a couple of organizations here that have been working with refugees and others who are about to go into a crisis fundraising mode because they're unsure about grants, and so they're going to have to raise several $100,000. So Nouwen says that should never be how we approach fundraising. It's not about we're responding to either a real or perceived crisis. He goes on to say that as a form of ministry, fundraising is no less important than the sermon that you're going to hear or have heard this morning, no less important than entering into a time of prayer, no less important than visiting the sick or in feeding the hungry. But all of those are intertwined, and all of those are an important part of what it means to be a person of faith. And he says when we ask people for money to strengthen or expand the work of the church, the work of the kingdom of God, then what we're doing is we're all being invited into a closer relationship with God. There's no separation between, well, money's over here and then my relationship with God is over here. Fundraising, he says, must always aim to create new and lasting relationships, to bind us together, to invite people into the work and the ministry of the church, of a nonprofit, whatever it may be. He says fundraising is a subject that we seldom think about, though, from a spiritual perspective. we often, again, want to separate it and think about, well, it's that time they're going to ask me for money, or I'm going to get that letter at the end of the year from this organization or my church. But what Nowlan tries to help us think about is that there's a connection between money and our spiritual lives. We might believe, he says, that fundraising reflects a failure to plan well or trust enough that God will provide for all our needs. Walter Brueggemann is a renowned Old Testament scholar who wrote an article a number of years ago in which he talks about how, in his opinion, we have what he refers to as a myth. We live under a myth of scarcity. A myth of scarcity. And his point is that we tend to live and operate under the idea or the assumption that we never have enough, that there's never going to be enough. We're going to run out. No matter how, and his point is, no matter how much we have, we tend to have somewhere back there this myth that there's not going to be enough. And he then goes on to suggest that what we really how we can really look at it through the eyes of God is through what he refers to as a liturgy of abundance. That there is, in some way, God will always provide for our needs. So whether we're asking for money now and says we're giving money, we're drawn together by God. So that when people like Ann and Andy stand up and talk about this church and the need that we have to be able to carry out the mission and ministry of this church, that we're being asked to come together and do that as people who are part of this church and who say that we believe in the ministry of God that we're trying to carry out through this parish. Asking people for money, he says, is giving us an opportunity to put our resources at the disposal of the kingdom. So one of the things that Ann and Andy talked about this morning in their presentation at the 8 o'clock service were the variety of ministries, the things that happen here at St. Peter's. And as you hear that, sometimes it's helpful to be reminded of how much actually does take place, some of which you may not be aware of. And so when we're saying this is who we are and this is what we're trying to do, then we're giving, each of us has the opportunity to put our resources into this pool that's helping to create ministry here in this setting. And then I've always really appreciated this. When we seek to raise funds now and says we are declaring we have a vision that is amazing and exciting. And that should be what propels what you're doing. Not, again, we've got to try to find a way to keep the lights on. Or we've got to try to find a way to fund, getting these doors fixed or this. All of those have to happen. What you're experiencing today and the relative comfort that we're sitting in and being able to have breakfast and all these things doesn't just happen. It does take money, but it should all start from being able to say we are doing something that's exciting, it's important, it's amazing, and would you come join that? Would you come be part of that? The invitation then is to invest yourself through the resources that God has given you, your energy, your prayers, and your money in this work to which God has called us. And I have to believe that you believe this in some way, that God has called us into this ministry, or you wouldn't be here. There may be a number of reasons why you're here, but ultimately, I think that you have to have some level of belief that you want to give of yourself and your time and your energy and your resources to furthering making this church more of what it can be and what it historically has been. So let me move down here. That when we talk about, as Ann and Andy have this morning, approaching people for money means we must be sure that we're inviting them into a vision of fruitfulness and into a vision that is fruitful. Again, my experience has been that when you start talking about paying electric bills and fixing things, sometimes people's eyes just glaze over. But when you talk about what it is that we're trying to do and to accomplish and who we're trying to be as a church, that's when people can get excited. That's when people can buy into it and want to be part of something and then represent that to others, to share that, to be that light of Christ through. I can't tell you all how many times just in the last year, some of you have invited someone to come to this church with you, and who have then, one of them is sitting right, Mary, can I put you on the spot for just a second? Mary Archer showed up here one morning about a year ago. Mary, is that right? Yeah. Yeah, and had been looking for another church, and connected here, and has been here regularly every Sunday since then, and has now become a member of St. Peter's. And that happens over and over again, where someone has said, would you come to my church? Let me tell you about my church. Let me tell you what's going on at my church, and you come worship. And then someone comes out and says, I want you to meet Barbara, who's my friend, and I invite her to come to church today. That's being the light of Christ. That's letting the light of Christ shine through you, because in some way, you're inviting them into a vision of fruitfulness. You believe that there's something worth sharing in this place. Okay, so I want us to just think for just a minute about, again, about money. We all have a money story. We all have a story, a big story. And of course, our story is connected to the story of God. I was doing a homily yesterday at a funeral, and I mentioned that how each of our lives are part of the story of God. God created us. We are part of this bigger picture, and each of us have an important role to play in this bigger picture that is the story of God. And we all have, in addition to we all have a story, we all have a money story. Our money practices, earning, saving, spending, sharing, those are expressions of our story, because they also reflect who we are, what we believe, what's important to us, what we think, what we value, the ways in which what we're willing to invest in many cases. Every big event, wedding, birth, vacation, sickness, death, those are all part of that story. And behind each one of those stories, as we all know, it has something to do with money, right? So what if, then I want to just throw a few questions out at you. What if we would talk about the money in our story with more transparency and vulnerability, and encourage others to do the same? What if we could listen for what money says about us as individuals, a family, as a church? And if we would listen, what would we learn? What might we learn? What might we learn about each other? What might we learn about the other? What might we learn that might help shape and form us more into making decisions about how we use our money in this church, and how we might want to direct or redirect some of the ways in which we currently allocate our money. One of the things that the last couple of vestries and I have been talking about is doing some more prioritization of our budget, so that we align the ways in which we allocate our resources to be more targeted towards those things that we feel are important. Instead of just saying, well, this is the way we did it last year, this is the way that it's been done for the last 5 years, so we're just going to continue to allocate 15% of our revenue to that, and only 3% of our revenue to that. Steve, would you mind closing that door? Just close that door if you would. Okay, so I want to just open it up for just a moment, and after throwing these questions out at you, and see if there's anyone who might be willing to share a little bit about your story, your money story, how it is that that might, and I'm not asking you to talk about how much money you make. I'm not asking you to talk about how much the way you spend your money or invest your money. But what's been your relationship with money? What do you see when you see this? Do you want to do what I suggested a few might want to do when I began this conversation today and leave the room? Or would you be willing to just talk a little bit about your relationship with money and how you feel like it might have impacted you in your life and your ministry? What do you think about these questions? What if we would talk about the money in our story with more transparency and vulnerability? Is that like an absolute no? Is that like a maybe? Is that like a I need to think about this?
I just have a question. In our family, when growing up, we talked about tithing, and you don't hear that so much anymore. But I think it is in the Bible. I just thought it would be nice if you could address that.
So the comment was about tithing. And there's in many traditions and in some Episcopal churches, there is often the request that people consider a tithe. Often that has been at the level of 10%. To say that if you are going to tithe your income, if you're going to make a pledge to the church that your target should be 10%. Well, there's nothing wrong with that, and I think it's helpful sometimes. But I also think that there are ways to talk about money and to talk about giving that can be as helpful or maybe more helpful than just saying we need or want everybody to be at 10%. Well, sure. I mean, there's biblical conversations about tithing, and I'm not in any way saying that tithing's not important. I think that can be a standard, and maybe should be a standard for all of us to get to try to get to 10%. But then there are many people who get beyond 10%, far beyond that. I was listening to something the other day. This person is a Methodist pastor in Kansas City who was talking about how he's written a number of books, and he's the pastor of a very large mega church there. And he was talking about how over the years he and his wife had finally gotten to a point where they had made a decision that they wanted to tithe or give away 38% of their income. So, to say that you certainly can set a standard of 10%. But then what you don't want to do is limit that and say, okay, I've gotten there, and then and limit the opportunity for someone who might want to do more than that in some way. Okay. Other comments about this? What if we could listen for what money says about us as individuals, a family, a church? What would that feel like?
I can tell you a story about somebody else that really influenced me and impressed me. Went out with a friend last year just for a light meal, and at the end of the meal, she was looking for our server, and she pulled out a $20 bill that seemed to me to be a lot for a tip. And she said, I'm investing in somebody else, and that they need the money more than I do.
Another way of letting the light shine, right? Yeah. Other thoughts, comments?
This isn't really an answer to your question, your rhetorical or otherwise. When I think about contributing or giving or whatever, I try to think about, and forgive how this sounds, but, you know, am I getting good bang for my buck? Okay. And for me, that means, you know, is it advancing something that is important to me? And I don't find it terribly difficult to give to St. Peter's, because most of what we do are things that I feel are valuable and that I kind of align with. I mean, I feel more strongly about certain things than I do about others, but generally, I feel like I'm putting my money where it will be well used, and I guess that goes to the whole point of stewardship. So, I mean, obviously I'm not the wealthiest person in the world either, but I still try to give as much as I can to the things that are important to me, and what we do is important to me.
Hi, I'd just like to piggyback on what Rick said. We are getting our bang for our bucks here, and when you all agree with me and more. I have to hold it close. Did you hear what I said? I talk loud anyway. I would just piggyback on what Rick said, that we are getting our bang for our bucks here, and I think we are just very appreciative of the atmosphere and the just everything about St. Peter's as we are today going into the future. The other thing I'd like to suggest to the vestry in the future is that perhaps we could do our giving above and beyond our pledge for a specific thing. For instance, this year I submitted my pledge card, and then I said I would like to go beyond that but make a specific request. Maybe somebody wants to redo the little building. Maybe somebody wants to do something else. But you know, hospitals and other people do that kind of thing. You can give to a specific thing. And I think that's something we should think about in the future with our giving.
Thank you.
Is this is on now? You all can. For me, giving is more than just the material gesture of giving cash or checks to something. To me, it's internally very different, because I truly learned at an early age through my parents and my in-laws that it is truly better to give than to receive. And I really feel that within inside of me. For instance, yesterday I was having breakfast at a favorite spot of mine, and two couples came in who were good friends of my kids. It was fun visiting with them, the whole 9 yards, and they were having such a good time, and I was so happy to see them enjoying themselves that when I was finished before they were, I went up and paid for my bill as well as theirs, and just left. They didn't realize that until after it was over. To me, I had the best feeling all day long because of that one little gesture. It wasn't a terrific amount of money, but it was a terrific feeling I received. And that's how I feel when I give to St. Peter's. It's giving at a higher level than what I did yesterday, but it gives me a very good feeling knowing that St. Peter's is doing something for people I don't know about, but who truly need funds, not only for this place, which is so important for me and my family, but for others in a community that I don't see and am unable to reach.
Thank you. All right, I'm just going to leave you with these questions to continue to consider and maybe to ponder. I am grateful that nobody ran for the exits this morning. We will not always talk about money in the Rector's Forum, but thank you all for being part of this and for listening. And I hope that some of what you've heard will stimulate your thinking some. I hope some of it quite frankly, maybe some of it made you like, oh, I don't know, didn't know we were going to talk about this today. But I think we need to continue to talk about it. I think we need to continue to hold it up and to raise it up as something that can be healthy, that can be helpful, and that will allow us to continue to find ways to be willing to support the work and the ministry of this place that I think all of us consider to be an important part of our lives.
Sorry, I could have come halfway. It's okay. Well, David, I want to thank you for talking about it, and especially the way you did talk about it. I think that all of us, when we get to this point, I'll just know I had my pledge card. It was easy for me to think about supporting St. Peter's, but having that nudge to push it up a little bit, that took me longer to think about. But I just think having the courage to present it like this and to really the whole way the campaign has been, I'm going to say thank you to you and all that have been involved.
It's good to be with you all. God bless you.